humanistic existential revolution. He's in the middle of a whole lot of other things, and also in the middle of the hippie movement, the women's movement, and the civil rights movement, and big changes in the country, including the way education has had effect on you and people right here. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bucky. We're also filming it, so if you could not have any background noise, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Steve, you're up.
Thank you. Okay. So, while we're trying to get our PowerPoint presentation up, we'll start without the presentation, which is, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Steve Bucky. I'm the only founder of CSPP left in the entire system. So CSPP started in San Francisco in 1969, went to LA in 1970, came here in 72, went to Fresno in 73. So of all of the initial faculties in those cities, nobody's left other than me. So everybody else has been fired, retired, or died, and they haven't told me which one they want me to leave. Yeah. It's one of those, chances are it will be, well, thank you. Wow, terrific. So, in any event, so we started here in San Diego 43 years ago, and CSPP as a group was started by 5 what was called crazy people. These are 5 former presidents of the California Psychological Association. I got here in 1972. I got associated with the founding dean, the picture of the founding dean, Maury Zimwick, on the library. I got into private practice with him. And prior to, in the summer, right before we go to start, we could start around September 1st or thereabouts, all the faculty were volunteers. None of us were getting paid. And what he did is, the founding dean, was he fired the person responsible for the professional training part of our program, because we made a commitment to, I believe we had 30 new students coming in. This was just a PhD program at that time. We had 30 students, and we promised them that they would be starting their internship, we called it an internship in the first year, as soon as they show up in San Diego on the first day. So we needed to have 30 placements ready to go. And sometime in July, the founding dean asked the person who was the director of professional training at that point, it was called an F-series coordinator, F standing for field, how many places did he have for our students coming in around September 1st, and he had exactly 0. And so fired this very senior person from clinical psychologist in La Jolla and asked me to take over that part of our program. So I was the first F-series coordinator, that then became dean for professional affairs, then became director of professional training, which is what I essentially have done the same job for the last 43 years. So I had to hurry and get 30 placements by September 1st. I came close to it. I didn't make it totally, but within a week or two, we had 30 placements. And after our first year, San Diego was very unsophisticated community from a psychological point of view, but because our students were so good and they were quite experienced, many of them, this was going to be their second career. They had been teachers, social workers, marriage, family therapists. The community was so impressed with our students that it became easier and easier as we grew to get more and more placements. So the responsibility for that, I got the credit for it, but the credit really belongs in the lap of our students, because they proved very clearly that they were an asset to our the psychological community. So a couple of things at the beginning that you should be aware of. So we started in 1972, as I mentioned. Probably the most attractive part of our program was that we required students to have clinical experience all the way through their career with us. It was decided in the early years that the program was going to be 4 years, not a day earlier or a day later. You had to graduate in 4 years or you were going to be terminated. At least that was the rumor, that was the policy. We never implemented that policy. But things were so tight around students graduating in 4 years, the faculty on the day of graduation were still reading dissertations in the back of the stage for graduation. So students were graduating even though their dissertation had not been signed off. So anyway, strange experiences. The key issue I want to mention about these 5 people, former presidents of the California Psychological Association, very senior people with considerable credibility around the country. Our initial president was Nick Cummings, who became president of the American Psychological Association. So when I say crazy people, essentially these 5 folks, and I, by the way, had just gotten out of graduate school, so I was the youngster of that group, and it was not considered part of that 5. I became president of the California Psychological Association several years later, but I was not part of that 5. The reason they were considered crazy folks, they were going around the state and around the country saying, we're starting our own independent professional school because we don't think you can do it competently, you being Stanford, UCLA, USC, Harvard, little places like that. They honestly believed that they were going to do something better than all those folks. And the reason it was going to be better, they were concerned that that we were not producing enough psychologists, and the psychologists that we were producing were so focused on research that we were not helping the citizens of the state of California, and this is true for the entire country. So they were concerned about serving the underserved. So they wanted each community, that there was a CSPP, to have a series of placements where our students were providing psychological services for people who otherwise would not be served. And actually we achieved that, I thought, rather well. Now, part of the foundation was that students were in a internship all the way through the program, so all 4 years you had to be in a half-time internship, okay? In addition to taking courses. Some other initial philosophical components that you might be interested in that we really had to change once we made the commitment to get APA accreditation. That decision was made in the late 70s. And I'll tell you about the changes we had to make shortly. So, key issue around the faculty. First of all, those of us who are faculty could only be faculty half-time. No full-time faculty, that was not acceptable. We had to be teaching in an area where we were practicing in the community. So if you were not practicing, you could not be a faculty member here. You could only be a faculty half-time. Another philosophical issue was everybody was equal. So there was no faculty rank. Because of APA, we now have faculty rank, so we have assistant professors, associate professors, full professors, there, everybody was equal. We did not want a status differential among the faculty. We also didn't want there to be tenure. So as a faculty, we voted not to have tenure. We wanted to be required to prove our worth, as opposed to after you get tenure, you can just float along and essentially do nothing productively. Okay. 2 year, by the way, the first year we didn't get paid anything. The second year, the full-time salary, you might be interested to know, was $20,000. And we only got paid half-time. So the most we could make was $10,000. Now, we were considered taking advantage of our students and making all this money, because the tuition, by the way, in that first year, I think was something like $1,600. So a little bit less than what you're paying now. In any event, in the community, there was concern that we were taking advantage of our students and we were generating this great wealth from the tuition that was being generated. In any event. All right, so let's move on. Another part of the philosophy, we wanted our students to be paying attention to who they were as individuals, and therefore we made the judgment that our students had to be in some form of psychotherapy for all 4 years that the students were in the program. A few years into our existence, the faculty was concerned that this 4 years of psychotherapy was overdoing it. It was too expensive for our students, too time-consuming, and maybe unnecessary. So then the faculty voted to change that to 1 year of individual therapy and 1 year of group therapy. Then that changed somewhere down the road, several years later actually, where the PsyD program, all of you who are PsyD students have to do 1 year of individual psychotherapy unless you've had individual therapy in the recent past. And the PhD faculty took the position that you no longer had to do a year's worth of psychotherapy any longer, so you could do a combination of professional training as opposed to simply some kind of personal development experience. I personally don't agree with that decision, but that's what the PhD faculty decided. Okay, in any event, so the 1 year of individual therapy, by the way, for PsyD, as I mentioned, is operationally defined as 40 hours. You send a proposal to me. You're all G1s? Okay. The proposal comes to me, I sign it off. My key issue in signing it off or not signing it off is whether you have a licensed psychologist as your therapist. PhD faculty are much more flexible. On the $20,000 salary, which really was 2 or 3 years into our existence, the dean says, I want to get paid more than the $10,000. He was really working full-time and getting paid $10,000. So we had a 3-hour, really worthless administrators meeting, the end of which we all agreed the dean should be making $11,000. We spent 3 hours of all the senior administrators coming up with this monument. So we are very good, by the way, at wasting time in meetings. We are spectacular from my point of view. And by the way, that's true not only at CSBP. Wherever you go, you're going to find meetings frequently worthless. Psychologists are very good at talking and talking and talking and saying nothing. So that's a choice you have. You may not want to go that route yourself. My approach is the shorter, the better. And by the way, that translates to what I do with my patients. I'm only to see my patients for a half an hour at a time. So some patients, particularly the New York Jewish group who's been in psychoanalysis, think that I'm totally out to lunch when I tell them I'm only going to see you a half hour. Now, the professional athletes that I see, when I say I'm only going to see you a half hour, they love that because everybody else throughout the NFL and Major League Baseball, they see the players for a full hour. So they're only stuck with me for a half hour. So, in any event, okay, moving right along. So we thought we were going to be more creative, think outside the box. The initial curriculum, by the way, was done in my living room with my 9-month-old son crawling throughout the multi-hour meeting. This was not a waste of time, other than I couldn't make my point. I was the only faculty member at that meeting who said, I think we're trying to teach our students too much. And people looked at me like I was an idiot, and maybe they're right. But my point was, I'd rather teach you less, more intensively, than as much as we teach superficially. I don't like that approach. And essentially, just about nobody agrees with me. Or they agree with me but keep their mouth shut because they want to make sure that their course doesn't get cut if we ever go that way. So everybody has their own self-interest that they're trying to protect here. So, but if you just focus on the quality of training, I don't view you as having to know everything known to mankind before you get out of here. You can do some learning like forever. And that's the preferable route. I think our most successful students are the ones who've really gotten a thorough general training as opposed, and by the way, there are some very good faculty who disagree with what I'm about to say, as opposed to specializing prematurely on X, Y, and Z. So there's some students who may come in, I really know I want to see children, I'm going to focus on children, I'm using that as an example, I just want to do children clinical experiences. Well, I don't view that as the best of the options. You are then handicapping yourself in terms of your success when you leave here. But there are people who have a different point of view. Okay, I wrote down some notes about some of our strange early days. You might be interested to know that our first campus was on the naval base in Point Loma. And so when we were teaching, we frequently would have to stop teaching because the marching band would come by the window and do the Star-Spangled Banner or God Bless America or whatever. So that was our first year. The Navy charged us $1 rent. So we couldn't beat that deal. But the second year, we got a campus in Sorrento Valley. So those of us as faculty who were thrilled, we're not going to have to listen to the Navy band every few minutes while we're teaching. Get to Sorrento Valley, and it turns out we're in the flight path for NAS Miramar, so the jets would fly over with teaching, so we had to frequently stop when the jets were flying over our head. Okay, moving right along. In the first year, faculty were somewhat complaining about the curriculum, which, as I mentioned, was done in my living room. And so the dean decided we're going to have a faculty retreat in San Clemente. San Clemente is about 45, 50 minutes north of here. So we had this all-day meeting, which could have been squished into probably 45 minutes from my point of view. In any event, we had some very heated discussions, primarily over what the curriculum should look like, okay? At the end of the meeting, I think we stopped pretty punctually at 5 or 5:30. Some of the faculty decided they were going to get drunk, and they were really kind of abusive of one another, calling each other names because they each thought they had the right idea as to what the curriculum was supposed to look like. There were a few others of us who said, we had enough of this discussion, we're going to go not get drunk, we're going to go play poker. So a group of us then went and played poker. Some of the drunk guys came over, by the way. We had, by the way, very few women in those days. I would say probably for every one woman, there were 10 males as students. The faculty, almost all were male. Very few women around. Things obviously have changed. We do have a token male here, another one here. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8, 9 out of probably close to 70 of you, I assume. So the percentages have obviously changed. Anyway, it was very easy to win at the poker game because ultimately most of the people were drunk. So that was a successful experience for me. After the poker game, I was standing out in front with the dean of students and a couple of other folks, and one of our largest faculty member comes wobbling up, who had been drunk, yelling, "I lost my hat, I lost my ring, I lost my shoe, and I fell down a cliff." And he was limping, and this is the nicest guy, nicest faculty member we had, but he was in bad shape because he had too much to drink, and apparently got into a fight with the dean, and he went roaming off and fell down this cliff. So he happened to be my roommate that night. So things were a little, the dean was a little bit on the cheap side. We couldn't get our own hotel room. So I was always matched up with him, and said, "Jim, you need," his name was Jim Chips, by the way, "you need to go to sleep." He said, "Yeah, you're right." So we were up on the second floor, I'm standing on the bottom, and he goes lumbering off drunk to our hotel room. I was concerned the way he was wobbling that I couldn't really trust him to get to our room. So I go running after him, which was fortunate that I did. This is very tall, probably 6'3". He was going right for the railing, which if he would have gone over that railing, he potentially would have landed head first. So anyway, I grabbed him by the shirt, got him into bed, and I went back downstairs to talk to the rest of the group. And then when I finally went upstairs, I had to listen to him snore all night. So this was not a good evening. I've never slept with anybody who snored, so this was an experience for me. Anyway, I told him we'll look for all the things that were missing in the morning. So I wake him up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go look for his ring and his hat and his shoe. We found most of what he lost except for his ring. And I said, "And where was," I didn't see any cliff. I said, "And where was the cliff that you fell down?"